Well, welcome to the Truth and Precept channel. It's been several months since I've put out my last video, and I have several in the works that will probably be releasing all at one time or closely within each other. But I wanted to get something out in the meantime, and I came across this article in the Millennial Star, and which I thought was interesting because there's scenarios that we face today in the church where we have developed policies, perhaps unspoken rules and expectations by which we are to abide, and even some of the laws I would say, of God have been reversed when we compare that to the time of Joseph Smith. And I think it would be very surprising for faithful members of the church who don't typically look at church history to see that there are important things that we do and teach today that Joseph Smith taught and advocated for us to not do. And so this is going to be an important exercise. I'm going to read through several excerpts from the history of Joseph Smith as reported in the Millennial Star. And this Millennial Star is, go to it here, it was published in 1852. And I'll make this bigger in just a moment, but you can see this contains an extract or an excerpt from the history of Joseph Smith. What I find interesting here, and I'll zoom in, is that this was published in 1852 in November. This is just months after the proclamation came out on the doctrine of plural wives. And first, and the editor here, right, Millennial Star, maybe we call this the motto of this paper, says, "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches." And so the editor has chosen, maybe coincidentally, maybe intentionally, some excerpts from the history of Joseph Smith, what he taught, a few months after polygamy became official in the state of Utah. And so we're going to read through some of these to see what this author is mentioning to us about what Joseph Smith taught. And I'm going to start down here, and maybe I'll flip this over here to a single page. And I'll insert some commentary along the way as well. But mostly this text stands on its own. And so as we consider, what Joseph Smith is teaching, we need to think about what we have been taught today. So starting here, according to the examples which are recorded in sacred writ, and which have actually been witnessed by many of the saints of the present dispensation. So we're told here that there are things that have been recorded, examples that are being witnessed by the saints of that present time. Men are called to receive the priesthood, and in virtue of it perform a certain work for which they seem adapted, and afterwards they are suffered to dishonor that priesthood by using the influence which they have gained to lead others astray, and thereby dishonor and reproach have at times been brought upon those who considered it a duty to listen to their counsel. By being enabled thus to accomplish their covetous, lustful, and unlawful ends, they have brought disgrace and suffering upon others. Who would those others be? Incurred the wrath of God and the disapprobation of his people upon themselves, and the power of the priesthood has altogether departed from them. For its virtue will not abide with those who violate its laws. Because of these facts, and the apparent imperfections of men on whom God confers authority, the question is sometimes asked, to what extent is obedience to those who hold the priesthood required? This is a very important question, and one which should be understood by all saints. In attempting to answer this question, we would repeat in short what we have already written, that willing obedience to the laws of God, administered or carried out by the priesthood, is indispensable to salvation. But we would further add that a proper conservative to this power exists for the benefit of all, and none are required to tamely and blindly submit to a man because he has a portion of the priesthood. I feel like this idea is one of these unspoken rules that are implied, expectations, and we're seeing that today in our culture with women in the priesthood and how submission or sustaining, right, as we would call it, to a man because he has a priesthood or higher authority than another given person. And so Joseph Smith is teaching here that you are not required to tamely, right, or blindly submit to a man just because he has a part of the priesthood. What would that be like to hear that in General Conference today? Continuing, we have heard men who hold the priesthood remark, they would do anything they were told to do by those who presided over them, if they knew it was wrong. But such obedience as this is worse than folly to us. It is slavery in the extreme. So this is a really big point in this excerpt here, that we have this idea that we have been taught that God may command us to do things which are good, or things that we may look at as being evil that go against a previous commandment. And the perfect case of this being the topic of this video is polygamy, right? The idea that polygamy is bad except, right, when God says it's not. Or when rather a man who holds a portion of the priesthood says that God said it's okay. And that it's concerning that someone would do anything they were told, even if they knew it was wrong, because that's what the scriptures teach, and that it sets up this case of slavery to the extreme, he says. Continuing, and the man who would thus willingly degrade himself should not claim a rank among intelligent beings until he turns from his folly. Okay, I'm going to skip down here. He just builds on that. Down here below, when the elders of Israel will so far indulge in these extreme notions of obedience, meaning, right, that you're going to do anything, whether you think it's right or wrong, because someone told you, a leader told you, as to teach them to this people, it is generally because they have it in their hearts to do wrong themselves and wish to pave the way to accomplish that wrong, or else because they have done wrong and wish to use the cloak of their authority to cover it with, lest it should be discovered by their superiors, who would require an atonement at their hands. We would ask, for what is the priesthood given unto men? It is that they may have a right to administer the law of God. Have they then a right to make void that law? Verily, no. So he's saying there is a law of God. And in the book of Jacob, in the book of Mormon, it says that the doctrine of multiple wives and concubines is an abomination. That's the law. And so the interpretation that we have spun in our recently, we'll say modern, quote unquote, recently, in the last 150 years, is that there's an exception found in that text to which many cases and analysis have shown that is not the case of Jacob too. And here, and he's going to build on this, he's saying that there is a law, and a person who has a priesthood has no right to change that law. Okay, when the law of God has gone forth from his own mouth and has been declared by the mouths of his prophets and apostles, saying, "Thou shalt not lie," who can say by the virtue of his priesthood, "You may lie and be approved"? So this goes against a lot of cases, like a Brian Hales who teaches that Joseph, by carefully worded denials, he was quote unquote lying for the Lord, and where he was practicing polygamy in secret while denying it in public. And here Joseph is saying that just because you have a priesthood doesn't mean you can say you can lie and it's approved. It's okay to do that. The Lord and his prophets have declared it as a law unto his people, "Thou shalt not commit adultery, and it will be no sin." Oh, and then who can say, "Thou mayest commit adultery, and it will be no sin"? So he addresses this point, and that we're going to see here, and these other Joseph Smith articles, Joseph Smith paper articles, that what does he mean by adultery? Certainly it also means what we think it means. But as we come over here to these other articles, I'm going to read what he considered to be adultery. So here in 1843, in November, so this is after the alleged Doctrine and Covenants 132 that was attributed to Joseph Smith, Joseph is saying, "In the evening the High Council sat on the case of Harrison Sagers, charged with seduction, and having stated that I taught it was right, charged, not sustained." So what he's talking about, right, is that people were using Joseph's name, and we're going to see this more here, that he taught it was okay to have spiritual wives. And that's what they called it during his time, having more than one wife. And they didn't call it temple marriage like we do today, or plural marriage. They called it spiritual wives. That was the language. "I was present with several of the 12, and gave an address tending to do away with every evil, and exhorting them to practice virtue and holiness before the Lord, told them that the church had not received any permission from me to commit fornication, adultery, or any corrupt action, but my every word and action has been to the contrary. If a man commit adultery, he cannot receive the celestial kingdom of God. Even if he is saved in any kingdom, it cannot be the celestial kingdom. I did think that the many examples that have been made manifest, such as John C. Bennett and others, were sufficient to show the fallacy of such a course of conduct. I condemned such actions in total, and warned the people present against committing such evils, for it will surely bring a curse upon any person who commits such deeds. So what I want you to see here is that he's tying, practicing virtue, so things that are virtuous, which is not fornication, adultery, or any corrupt action, right, which is in the case of Harrison Sagers, right, this doctrine from John C. Bennett about spiritual wives, you can't receive the celestial kingdom, right? We come over here to this other one here. So this is 1842. Joseph replied, "Doctor, why are you using my name to carry on your hellish wickedness? Have I ever taught you that fornication and adultery was right, or polygamy, or any such practices. He said, you never did. Did I ever teach you anything that was not virtuous, that was iniquitous, either in public or private? He said, you never did. So here we're getting more ties that Joseph does not consider polygamy or spiritual wifery, right? That they were using his name, saying Joseph said it was okay, right? They were placing somebody who had higher authority than them to justify their actions. And Joseph said that these things are not virtuous. Okay, now in a here to the in a talk to the Relief Society, 1842. He says, shall the credulity, good faith, and steadfast feelings of our sisters for the cause of God or truth be imposed upon by such men? Now, these are men who may be aspiring after power and authority, and yet without principle. Right? They are destroying the virtue and innocence of women, as he stated up here above. Um, and so, should the sisters be imposed upon by such believing men, because they say they have authority from Joseph, or the first presidency, or any other presidency of the church, and thus with a lie in their mouth deceive and debauch the innocent under the assumption that they are authorized from these sources? May God forbid. A knowledge of some such things have come to our ears. We improve this favorable opportunity, wherein so goodly a number of you may be informed that no such authority ever has, ever can, or ever will be given to any man. And if any man has been guilty of any such thing, let him be treated with utter contempt, and let the curse of God fall upon his head, and let him be turned out of society as unworthy of a place among men, and denounced as the blackest and the most unprincipled wretch, and finally let him be damned. Okay. Um, he's pretty strong there. And we'll come down here. Suffice it to say, there are those, and we therefore warn you and forewarn you in the name of the Lord, to check and destroy any faith that any innocent person may have in any such character. For we do not want anyone to believe anything as coming from us, contrary to the old established morals and virtues and scriptural laws regulating the habits, customs, and conduct of society, and all persons pretending to be authorized by us or having any permit or sanction from us are and will be liars and base impostors, and you are authorized on the very first intimation of the kind to denounce them and such, and shun them as the flying fiery serpent, whether they are prophets, seers or revelators, patriarchs, 12 apostles, elders, priests, mayors, generals, city councilors, aldermen, marshals, police, lord mayors, or the devil, are alike culpable and shall be damned for such evil practices. And if you yourselves adhere to anything of the kind, you shall be damned. Now, beloved sisters, do not believe for a moment that we wish to impose upon you. We actually do know that such things have existed in the church, and are sorry to say that we are obliged to make mention of any such thing, and we want a stop put to them, and we desire you to do your part, and we will do ours, for we wish to keep the commandments of God in all things as given directly from heaven to us, living by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord. And then one last one here. This is from December 1838. We have heard that it has been reported by some, that some of us should have said that we not only dedicated our property, but our families also to the Lord. And Satan, taking advantage of this, has transfigured it into lasciviousness, such as a community of wives. So what we're seeing here is, right, they're trying to live the law of consecration, dedicating their property, and some people, some men viewed their wives as property, and so they would dedicate this to, they thought it was all the wives were for the church. And so he says, this thing is an abomination in the sight of God. When we consecrate our property to the Lord, it is to administer to the wants of the poor and needy, for this is the law of God. It is not for the purpose of the rich, those who have no need. And when a man consecrates or dedicates his wife and children, he does not give them to his brother or to his neighbor, for there is no such law, for the law of God is, thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Right? He that looketh upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery in his heart. So we could see here in a lot of these quotes, right, Joseph Smith is very clear, especially around the time before and after, that he is against this community of wives, the spiritual wifery, where men are taking and using his name to say that it is okay for them to have multiple wives. And that, as we read before, that, come back over here, that law, he cannot make, no man can make void that law. Right? No one has the right to be able to do that, to change God's laws. So I'm going to continue reading Millennial Star here. When the law of God has gone forth from his own mouth, and has been declared by the mouths of his prophets and apostles, saying, thou shalt not lie, right? Who can say by virtue of the priesthood, you may lie and be approved, right? So we just read that people were lying. They were using Joseph's name by virtue of his priesthood, and they were committing adultery. And I'm going to come down here. And in like manner, it can be asked of all the laws of God, who has the right to make them void? None can revoke the decree, but him by whom it was given. Neither can the laws of God be trampled upon with impunity or revoked by a lesser power that by which they were framed. It is written of God that he cannot lie. Then none need suppose that he will approve of it through his authority which is on the earth. So he will not approve here of trampling the laws that he has already given. Right? He will not approve of that through his authority on earth. Neither is he the Son of Man that he should repent, right? or change, right, from that which is left to that which is right. Therefore he will maintain the law by which his kingdom is governed. Should any think that they can give counsel or gratify their lusts, or answer of avarice, can't say that word, avaricious ends, and say, no one seeth us, while they indulge therein, and delight in sin as a sweet morsel, they will learn with sorrow that the eye which never sleeps has been upon their path, and he that seeth in secret shall make manifest and reward openly every man according to his deeds, whether good or evil. If a man could have as much authority as the Almighty, it would not authorize him to do wrong, nor counsel another to do wrong. And the man that will administer with partiality for the sake of screening iniquity will find his stewardship will be taken from him. Right. And then I'm going to come up here. Should a person be required to violate a known law by his president, or if he is not satisfied with the counsel which he gives, and then he goes on to say that you should push for a discussion at a higher priesthood level. Right? If your president above you is telling you to do things which goes against a known law. We'll come down here. Okay. So he will then have no occasion to destroy his own influence and power by telling others that it will be no sin for them to commit adultery, to lie or steal, etc., etc. And if they are told to do it by the priesthood, and thereby pervert the right ways of the Lord, and bring reproach upon his honor of his cause, the Lord asks for no such confidence in his priesthood at this, neither do good men who are under its influence. The priesthood never demands a wrong at the hands of another, though men who hold the priesthood may make such a demand, as has sometimes been the case, and for which they have had to suffer. Where the authority of God is, there should be confidence of all men, but reposed sufficiently to obey its laws, but not to violate them. For we have not yet learned that it has power enough to save the transgressor and his sins. Some men have been so wise as to think the little authority they had was sufficient for them to set aside law and revelation and mete out justice and judgment upon their own responsibility. But in the end, they have found that responsibility to be greater than they could bear. And then we're going to skip down here. Some have supposed that the more authority men have in the kingdom of God, the greater the liberty to disregard his laws, and that their greatness consists in their almost unlimited privileges which leave them without restrictions. But this is a mistaken idea. Those who are the greatest in authority are under the greatest restrictions. The law of their sphere is greater than that of those who are less in power, and the restrictions and penalty of that law are proportionally great. Therefore, they are under greater obligation to maintain the virtue of the law in the institutions of God. Otherwise, confidence could not be reposed in them, but distrust and evil surmisings would be the result. Disaffection would be found lurking in every avenue of society, and by thus severing the cords of union, it would prove the destruction of any people. So this is another very important part where we are taught in the church that the law of multiple wives is the higher law. And here Joseph, in other words, right, is saying that, come here, someone who has more authority, right? Someone who says they have more authority or a higher priesthood, right? Those who are greatest in authority, right? Who are the greatest in authority, among us today? And he says they're actually under greater restrictions, right? It's not that the higher you go, then you can break the laws of the lower, right? Those in lesser in power or lower in spheres. You still have to keep those laws, and you have to keep have greater restrictions, right? They get more strict. The stricter the obedience, the higher you go. And he says if it wasn't that way, right, we could not have confidence, right? We would distrust and evil would infiltrate the church in our society if things did not get stricter the higher we went and closer to God. And it would prove the destruction of any people if they lived a different law, if they changed it. And that's what we have done in the church, right? And so this is what Joseph Smith is teaching, and it differs from what we have been taught in the church today. We have been taught, right, that plural marriage is allowed when God commands it, that he can change his laws, and that it's a higher law, right? You have to be more righteous to be able to live this law, when that could be further from what Joseph Smith is teaching here. And just like they were in his day, we do it today, where we are attributing Joseph's name, right, to the establishment of plural marriage, which was brought on by men who have, as we come back here, right, men with priesthood that he's warned us about, who would teach us, right, to secretly, up until that time, it was until 1852 that they would then, the leaders, officially and openly teach that it was okay to seek the wives of other men, which they did do. Uh, Parley P. Pratt was killed by a man who Parley P. Pratt was trying to marry his wife. That's how he died, and we call him a martyr. And so they were trading wives, and uh, they were doing things to get as many wives and that's what Brigham Young taught, was he could get any woman because he had higher authority and they would want to be with him. So I hope this becomes a little bit more self-evident that there are things being taught in the church that we need to push out. We need, you know, just like with blacks in the priesthood, right? The church has since disavowed that teaching and said that it was wrong. And, I can't help but think, if I had lived before that priesthood ban, would I have not stood up for, my black brothers to have the priesthood when that was wrong? And the church since stated that. And so we know that polygamy is wrong. We have it from Joseph's word. We have it. It is the known law. And there is no exceptions to it. And so we need to really push this teaching out of the church. It's not acceptable. It is an abomination. And thanks for listening once again. And I'll have pretty soon some very interesting videos as as I try to present things that are kind of that aren't being spoken about a lot. Truths that we need to hear, that we have lost, that are found in the scriptures. And however, they do take quite a bit of work to uncover and put together and to validate that what I'm showing is not just my opinion, but it is supported by multiple witnesses. But of course, I can get things wrong as well. And so, I present the information and you study it out on your own and come to your conclusion with the Lord. And I'll see you next time.